The 80s gave us movies that felt like neon guidebooks to life, with characters who taught us how to kiss, fight, cheat, and sometimes even dance our way out of trouble. But looking back, a lot of these films are stranger, darker, or more chaotic than anyone remembers, and their behind-the-scenes stories are even better. Which brings us to Big Trouble in Little China. Big Trouble in Little China throws a swaggering truck driver named Jack Burton into San Francisco's Chinatown, where he thinks he's the hero, but mostly stumbles while his friend Wang Chi does the heavy lifting. Together, they descend into an underground maze of neon-lit sorcery to rescue Wang's fiancée from Lo Pan, an immortal villain desperate to break a curse by marrying a woman with green eyes. The movie bends kung fu, fantasy, and satire into something so odd it almost feels like a parody of action movies that didn't exist yet. Behind the scenes, Kurt Russell turned down the lead in Highlander to play Jack, then trained like a real action star, only to spend half the movie slipping, fumbling, or shooting the ceiling and knocking himself out. On one brutal day, he filmed through a raging flu, and the sweat dripping off him was no special effect. It was real fever sweat pouring out under the studio lights. The role of Wang nearly went to Jackie Chan, but producers thought his English wouldn't land with American audiences, a decision that left Dennis Dunn to quietly steal the movie. Even the opening scene wasn't Carpenter's idea. Executives demanded it to make Jack look like the lead, proof that even cult classics sometimes come from studio meddling. Adventures in Babysitting begins with Elizabeth Shue's Chris Parker expecting a quiet suburban night until a desperate phone call drags her and the Anderson kids into downtown Chicago, where every block seems to add another disaster. They stumble through a car theft ring, a gang fight on the subway, and a skyscraper ledge rescue that still makes viewers dizzy, all before sneaking home just in time to hide the chaos from the parents. Shue was barely out of college when she landed the lead, beating out names like Phoebe Cates, and the pressure was enormous. But castmates remembered how she carried herself with calm maturity even while doing her own risky stunts. The skyscraper scene where Sarah dangles from the building was filmed with Shue leaning over the edge herself, and that genuine fear reads clearly on her face. Keith Coogan, who played Brad, later admitted he had a crush on her the whole shoot, and that she seemed untouchable, which only made his awkward character more believable. The most unforgettable sequence, The Blues Club, was shot with real Chicago musicians, led by Albert Collins, who had never lip-synced before, and had to be coaxed through take after take, his confusion becoming part of the charm. What was marketed as a teen comedy plays more like an urban odyssey, with Shue holding it all together as everything around her spins out of control. Trading Places is the story of a rich man falling into poverty and a hustler rising into luxury, all because two aging millionaires want to prove whether success comes from birth or circumstance. Eddie Murphy plays Billy Ray Valentine, a street con suddenly living like royalty, while Dan Aykroyd's Louis Winthorpe loses his mansion, his fiancée, and even his dignity after being framed for crimes he never committed. Their collision turns into an unlikely friendship, and together they outsmart the old men who toyed with them in a final act of poetic justice played out on the chaotic floor of the commodities market. Donna Mecha, who played one of the scheming brothers, had not been in a film for over 14 years, and the director actually thought he had passed away before realizing he was quietly living in Santa Monica without an agent or much work at all. He arrived grateful for the chance, though he winced at the script's profanity and famously had to be convinced to growl his one curse word, apologizing after the camera stopped. The trading floor chaos was not staged extras but genuine Wall Street brokers filmed during live hours, where the shouting and shoving became so disruptive that actual trading had to pause while Murphy and Aykroyd played out their climax. Overboard begins with Joanna Staten, a spoiled heiress living on a yacht, berating and underpaying the carpenter who built her closets before tossing him overboard without a cent. That carpenter, Dean Prophet, sees his chance at revenge when Joanna suffers amnesia after an accident, claiming she is his wife and dragging her into his chaotic life with 4 unruly boys and a shabby Oregon home. What starts as punishment slowly turns into affection as she learns to cook, clean, and care, only to realize she has built a family more real than her life of privilege. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell were in the first years of their own romance during filming, and their natural banter bled into the performances, giving the comedy an easy warmth. The coastal location brought headaches for everyone else, with fog and rain ruining lights and cameras, while soggy costumes had to be dried overnight just to be worn again. One of the film's funniest moments, the collapsing wardrobe and sudden pratfall, was not even in the script, but a mistake with props that sent Hawn stumbling in character, a moment kept because her exasperated glare landed too perfectly. The film pretends to be about deception, but lingers in memory because of the way love felt more honest when everything around it was an accident. The Legend of Billie Jean tells the story of a teenage girl in Corpus Christi who becomes an outlaw by accident and a folk hero by circumstance, after her brother's scooter is vandalized and an attempt to demand repayment leads to assault, a shooting, and a flight from the law. With her blonde hair chopped short in a Joan of Arc-style transformation and a media circus turning her into a symbol, Billie Jean becomes less a girl on the run and more a face of rebellion, inspiring crowds of teenagers who chant her name and wear her likeness as though she were already a legend. Helen Slater refused to cut her hair as short as the studio wanted, which changed the character's look but made the final cut more iconic, the crop style becoming a visual shorthand for defiance. Filming was not nearly as glamorous as the on-screen revolution, with so-called summer beach scenes shot in the middle of winter, the cast shivering in thin costumes while crew members huddled with space heaters just out of frame. Christian Slater, still a teenager, reportedly wept after shooting a scene in a wig and dress, rattled by how it might affect him. Proof that the line between a role and reality can feel heavier for young actors than for the audience watching them decades later. Manhunter brings the story of Hannibal Lecter to the screen years before Silence of the Lambs, though here he is called Hannibal Lecter, a minor but chilling presence in a film that is really about Detective Will Graham hunting a serial killer known as the Tooth Fairy. Directed by Michael Mann, the film glows in neon blues and greens, turning Miami and suburban houses into dreamlike crime scenes that feel more like nightmares soaked in sunlight. William Peterson immersed himself so deeply into the role of Graham that he asked Mann to dye his hair gray to capture the exhaustion of a man who sees too much horror, and when filming wrapped, he burned the clothes he had worn in character, saying he wanted to shed the darkness as completely as possible. Brian Cox, who played Lecter with an unsettling calmness, later revealed that his inspiration came partly from listening to recordings of serial killers giving interviews, which gave his version a terrifying restraint. Though the film was not a box office hit, its style shaped television crime dramas for decades, and Peterson himself would later return to a similar haunted investigator in CSI, making Manhunter feel almost like a prelude to the crime-saturated television landscape that followed. Tequila Sunrise follows Mac, a former drug dealer trying to go straight, who finds himself tangled in old loyalties and new betrayals when his childhood friend Nick, now a slick detective, keeps him under watch while also circling the same woman, a restaurant owner named Joanne. What looks like a sunlit California love triangle unfolds into a noir of backroom deals, murky friendships, and the shadow of a drug lord, with every glass of wine and candlelit dinner carrying more danger than romance. Kurt Russell styled his detective character after Lakers coach Pat Riley, with the slicked back hair and sharp suits giving him an aura of control that contrasted with Mel Gibson's brooding Mac. Michelle Pfeiffer, caught in the middle on screen, was under strain off-screen, clashing at times with director Robert Towne, whose perfectionism collided with her own frustrations, especially during a grueling shoot on the damp Oregon coast. One of the film's most talked about moments, the intimate hot tub sequence, was less glamorous than it looks, with a poorly built set that left the actors nursing rashes from unchlorinated water and splinters from rough wood. Proof that movie passion can be a very itchy business behind the camera. The Night Before opens with Keanu Reeves waking up in a dirty alley wearing a white tuxedo jacket, broke, confused, and with no memory of how he got there. And through a series of flashbacks, the audience learns that he was supposed to take Lori Loughlin's cheerleader character to prom, but instead lost her in a series of increasingly bad decisions. What should have been a high school Cinderella night becomes a neon crawl through East Los Angeles, complete with stolen cars, a ruthless pimp named Tito, and an accidental human trafficking deal that turns a comedy into something darker than expected. Reeves, still early in his career, leaned into awkwardness so hard it played as sincerity, a quality that would later define him, while Loughlin broke from her wholesome image with a role that left her character stranded, drugged, and sold. A tonal swing few teen movies dared to make. In one seedy nightclub sequence, real funk legends George Clinton and Bootsy Collins appear with the P-Funk All-Stars, giving the film an almost surreal collision of prom night hijinks and genuine musical history. Looking back, the film feels like an experiment that mixed teen comedy with crime drama, unsettling stereotypes, and an uneven tone. But the raw energy of young Keanu stumbling through danger has kept it alive as a cult curiosity.